He was no shooter, no drug courier, no soldier. But he built a multi-billion empire from nothing and became the most wanted man in Europe. This is the story of Daniel Kinahan, the man who continued to control the Irish underworld from Dubai. Daniel Kinahan was born in 1977 in Dublin, Ireland. He grew up in a world where crime was no secret, but a family inheritance. His father, Christy Kinahan, also known as the Dapper Don, was a notorious drug lord and money laundering specialist. He was known for his intellect, spoke multiple languages, and had connections reaching into South America. But Daniel chose his own path, with the same world as his playground, but with a very different game plan. As a young boy, he saw how his father was arrested time and time again, interrogated, but rarely convicted. The lesson was clear. Those who are smart leave nothing behind, no evidence, no words, no mistakes. That strategy would define Daniel's entire life. At school, he wasn't particularly academic, but his true education took place on the streets and in the living room. He learned from his father, from the people around him, and from the violence that began to grip Dublin in the 1990s. Irish neighborhoods like Crumlin and Drimnagh were breeding grounds for small gangs, drug dealing, and personal feuds. Daniel moved easily among them, but always managed to stay just outside the front line. Unlike his father, who ran the business himself, Daniel chose early on to become a shadow strategist. He was not the one delivering, negotiating, or threatening. He was the one who observed, built structures, and let others do the work. His calmness, his ability to stay unnoticed, and his willingness to remain in the background for years made him unique in a world full of egos and loud voices. Around his 20s, he began building his own network. First locally, but soon across borders. He did not join existing gangs, but instead built an organization based on loyalty, efficiency, and above all, invisibility. The name Kinahan was more and more linked to large-scale drug trafficking in Dublin, no longer only with Christy, but now with Daniel too. A new generation, younger, more modern, harder. Daniel knew, to become truly powerful, he had to leave Dublin. The city was too small for his ambitions. His goal was not to control a few streets. He wanted an empire, and that began on the sun-drenched coast of Spain. In the early 2000s, Daniel Kinahan moved his operations to the Costa del Sol in southern Spain. Not for the climate, but for the strategic location between Europe, North Africa, and South America. At that time, the Spanish coast was already a safe haven for fugitives from Ireland, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. But where others came to hide, Daniel came to build. His father, Christy, was already established there and had built an international network dealing in drug shipments, counterfeit money, weapons, and laundering schemes. Daniel stepped into that network but slowly transformed it into something much bigger, the Kinahan Cartel. Under his leadership, it grew into a multinational of organized crime. He worked with Colombian suppliers, Moroccan hashish producers, Dutch transporters, Serbian intermediaries, and British distributors. The scale was immense. The Kinahan Cartel was estimated to be responsible for importing tons of cocaine into Europe each year. Pure shipments straight from South America, bringing in millions in profit. The way Daniel operated was different from the traditional model. He kept strictly out of sight. No social media, no phones. Everything went through encrypted communication, couriers, and carefully selected confidants. Instead of a hierarchical model, he chose a cellular structure. Small groups that operated independently, but were coordinated from the center. This way, one arrest could never topple the entire network. What made him even more dangerous was his ability to set up money laundering networks. He used real estate in Dubai, shell companies in Panama, Irish front companies, and even cryptocurrency to make his millions disappear. Authorities could barely trace where the money came from or where it went. Europol and the Gardaí, the Irish police, were closing in on him. There were major raids, arrests of intermediaries, intercepted shipments, but Daniel himself remained untouchable. No photos, no wiretaps, no direct link. Meanwhile, his reputation among other criminal networks grew. He started making deals with Dutch Makro clans, British gangs, and Eastern European groups. The Kinahan cartel became a kind of umbrella system that other networks cooperated with and became dependent on. By 2014, his name was first widely mentioned in international investigation files. Authorities described one of the largest, best organized, and most dangerous criminal networks in Europe. But Daniel remained invisible. No appearances, no statements, only a whispered reputation. Yet everyone knew, if you did business at a high level in Europe, you couldn't avoid him. But just when he seemed most powerful, something threatened to destroy his empire. A family feud that escalated into a bloody war. What began as a business dispute within the Irish underworld grew into a ruthless vendetta between two families, the Kinahans and the Hutch clan. A bloody war that turned Dublin into a shooting gallery and put Daniel Kinahan firmly on the radar of global law enforcement. The break began in 2015 when Gary Hutch, a nephew of the infamous Jerry the Monk Hutch, was murdered in Spain. Gary had worked for the Kinahans in Marbella for years, but fell out over money and loyalty. Tensions rose high. According to insiders, Gary felt his life was in danger and asked his family in Dublin for protection. Shortly afterward, he was gunned down, and suspicion immediately fell on Daniel Kinahan. What followed was a chain reaction of revenge. In February 2016, the Regency Hotel Shooting took place in the middle of Dublin. 5 armed men stormed a boxing event, disguised as police officers. Their target, Daniel Kinahan himself. But he had already left. Instead, David Byrne, one of his trusted men, was shot dead. The images went around the world: Kalashnikovs, masks, panic. It was a military-style assassination attempt, and the Hutch clan's answer to the murder of Gary Hutch. From that moment on, hell broke loose. In the years that followed, at least 18 people were killed in a spiral of retaliation. Some were directly linked to the families, others killed simply because of who they knew or where they lived. No distinction was made between perpetrators, friends, or relatives. Even innocent civilians were hit by mistake. The Irish police introduced anti-terror measures, extra surveillance, heavily armed units, witness protection. The city of Dublin had become a war zone. And Daniel? He sat safely abroad. Sources said he moved between Spain, Morocco, and later Dubai. Although he was not physically present at the murders, he was seen as the mastermind behind the escalation. He allegedly gave the orders, selected the targets, and financed the operations. His name became synonymous with a war without rules. A war that was not only about honor or money, but about the total annihilation of the enemy. The Irish government began publicly naming him as a top priority. International agencies also began to get involved, because the conflict had meanwhile spread to the Netherlands, Spain, and the United Kingdom. What this war revealed above all was how powerful Daniel Kinahan had become. He didn't have to act himself. One word from him could cost lives. But while blood was being spilled, Daniel at the same time found a way to legitimize himself. A clean, polished facade that brought him into TV studios, sports arenas, and multi-million contracts. That facade was boxing. While Dublin groaned under a blood feud he orchestrated from afar, Daniel Kinahan built a completely different image, that of a respected sports manager in the world of professional boxing. His ticket into that world was MTK Global, a boxing promotion company he co-founded in 2012 under the name Mac the Knife Promotions. MTK started small with Irish fighters in local circuits, but grew rapidly into one of the most powerful organizations in global boxing. How? Money. Lots of money. Daniel poured millions into the company, gave fighters better contracts, paid for training camps, arranged fights. Under his leadership, top fighters signed with MTK, including world champions like Billy Joe Saunders and Tyson Fury. Fury in particular drew attention when, in interviews, he openly thanked Daniel Kinahan for arranging fights and contracts. something that immediately rang alarm bells with journalists and authorities. Because this Daniel Kinahan was not just a sports agent. Behind the tailored suits and corporate press statements was still a man wanted for drug trafficking, murder plots, and global-scale money laundering. And yet, he walked freely in Dubai. There, he settled in luxury apartment complexes, far from European law enforcement. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, offered him comfort, protection, and for now, safety. The UAE had no extradition treaty with Ireland, and Daniel made eager use of that. Meanwhile, MTK Global kept growing. They organized fights in Las Vegas, London, and Abu Dhabi. They signed media deals, sponsorships, contracts with major fight platforms. Boxing was no longer a sport with shady backrooms. It was big business, and Daniel was in the middle of it. But the more he came into the spotlight, the greater the pressure became. In 2021, the US and Europol officially launched a hunt for him. The American government offered a $5 million reward for information leading to his arrest or conviction. Financial institutions were warned. Anyone doing business with Daniel Kinahan or his network could be prosecuted. MTK Global denied his involvement, but international media found documents, photos, and emails proving the opposite. In April 2022, authorities struck. The United States, together with Irish and British law enforcement, imposed sanctions on Daniel, his father Christy, and his brother Christopher Jr. Accounts were frozen, companies blocked, international pressure increased. MTK Global collapsed, sponsors pulled out. The organization fell apart, but Daniel himself was once again nowhere to be found. Dubai ignored the extradition requests, and although he completely lost visibility, no one believed he had given up power. What he did do was return to his natural state, invisibility. Because where most criminals fail in the spotlight, Daniel Kinahan knows how to hide in the shadows. And it's there that he remains extremely dangerous. Today, Daniel Kinahan is a man without an official address, without bank accounts, without a legal source of income. But make no mistake, he is still one of the most powerful figures in the European underworld. He has no cartel like in Mexico, no army like in Colombia, no flag, no country, no political party. But what he does have is connections, influence, trust. And that is sometimes more dangerous than weapons or troops. His network is still intact, fragmented, fluid, but active. The Kinahan organization is described by Europol and the DEA as a criminal enterprise with global reach, responsible for smuggling billions of euros worth of cocaine, heroin, and synthetic drugs. The network has branches in Ireland, the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, the UAE, Colombia, and even Australia. And although many of his pawns have now been arrested, some remain silent, out of fear, out of loyalty, or simply because they know that even from afar, Kinahan is still listening. What makes Daniel Kinahan so unique is his ability to disappear when necessary, his adaptability. He shifts from drugs to sport, from visibility to shadow, from Dublin to Dubai. And every time you think he is out of the picture, it turns out he is playing a new game behind the scenes. He is the modern ghost, not a gangster in a tracksuit, but a strategist in a tailored suit. Not a leader with a pistol, but a businessman with a network. Not a threat on the street, but on paper, in contracts, in systems. And as long as no arrest takes place, as long as Dubai keeps protecting him, he is effectively untouchable. But the question remains, for how much longer? The pressure is mounting, sanctions are growing, political pressure is rising. Even Dubai is beginning to feel that the West expects something in return. So what happens when Daniel Kinahan falls? What will he reveal? Who will he drag down with him, and who will still be standing? Perhaps that is the only reason why he still walks free. Because too many people know that if this man falls, more will fall than just a cartel.